Hey, makers. Well, everything is almost ready for us, but the wiring is not. In this episode, I will show you how I solder Les Paul in the 50s scheme. What materials do I use, and what nuances should be considered when wiring the guitar. This is a very important topic, because our signal is transmitted through the electronic path, and if something is wrong in it, something is of poor quality, then the signal will be lost. We will have losses. Therefore, you need to choose high-quality materials for soldering, and do the soldering itself also with high quality. Let's go. So friends, let's start wiring 59th Les Paul, according to the scheme of the 50s. To do this, I need 4 potentiometers, a switch, a switchcraft switch, this wonderful board that will clearly show how, what and where to solder. Then I will need capacitors. I really love these. These are vintage 52 NOS caps. They have a capacity of 0029 microfarads. This is slightly more than 0022, but they sound very good nonetheless. Of course, I love this military K42Y2 and gray K40Y9. These are Soviet capacitors that were produced in Ukraine, so you can still find them there. But 0022 microfarads are already very difficult to find. Mostly 0047 at 200 watts come across. This is my 015 microfarads at 160 watts. And this one is 0022 for 1000 watts, but it's very large, although it will sound exactly the same as Bumblebee. This is paper and oil, and this is our foil. Although it's quite possible this is also paper and oil, although there are no legs here. Usually PIO caps have a leg here and here, through which oil is poured inside during production. I will use these condensers. Potentiometers are not CTS. This is a replica of vintage central amps. They are made by vintage-inspired pickups. I haven't tried them yet, so let's try here and now. They say they have exactly the same open-close step as vintage central amp potentiometers. Let's check how it works. So, where to start with wiring the guitar? Oh, there's some dirt there. Here I have drawn the timber block of the 50s Les Paul. Here will be the input of wires, and here an output for a jack. Let's put everything together. So, these legs should be turned to the center a little bit, so it'll be more convenient to work with them. Here's our second capacitor. It would be nice to clean them. They have 60-year-old dirt on them. Again, I use isopropyl alcohol. In fact, you can choose completely different capacitors for yourself. This is a matter of taste. Let's say I really like how Bumblebee sounds, but not PIO, but the foil ones. Once there was an option in the 50s, in the late 50s. They look exactly the same, absolutely identical. Only the paper oil capacitor has a leg for pouring oil. And the foil ones, they're as solid as these. Here, although they write that this is paper oil, but it doesn't matter. They sound very cool. Paper oil, they're pretty dark. They give a very deep, deep tone. And foil bumblebees, they sound very good in the mid-range. Very thin. I really like it. Therefore, I decided to use both, one paper oil and one foil. I have paper oil on the bridge position, and in the neck, I have foil bumblebee capacitor. I love when everything is neat and pretty. So we need to make sure that our wires won't get crossed, so they won't interfere. I insulate them with heat shrink tube. Traditionally, you can use fiberglass tubing impregnated with shellac. Well, you can also do it in this way. Nothing will change in the sound. This is just a decorative effect. I ran out of tubing, the correct fiberglass, but this one remains. You can actually use the braid of such a vintage wire. Here's white, black, yellow, multicolored. You get the wire, that's it. We take out the wire and neatly, without deforming the tubing. Okay. Oh wow, pretty good. With this tubing, everything is much easier. It will fit well, then it will not peel off when we squeeze it. We need somewhere around 2–2.5 centimeters. This strip shows the beginning of the curling of the foil or paper. That is, this is the beginning and this is the end. Entry, exit. I love when the signal goes first and goes to the outer shell. I like it that way. As you like, you have to decide for yourself. Someone will say that it does not matter at all. It matters. A little, but it does. Someone hears it, someone does not hear it, but nevertheless, it is a fact. So decide for yourself how you like to put them more from the beginning to the end or in the opposite direction. You gotta decide for yourself. This is how they will stand. But first, we need to take care of the legs and with the wiring diagram. The wiring diagram hangs before my eyes. This brochure came to me a long time ago from the company Lux. I bought my first replicas of bumblebee capacitors from them when I was making a prototype of Les Paul 59 Sophie Burst. I ordered components from them, and so they sent me this brochure with a description of vintage wiring. This is a very informative piece of paper that is just constantly in front of my eyes. Look, I'll give you a link to a photo in a good resolution. Print it out and have it handy, because it's very useful. It has a traditional wiring of the 50s, 70s, the end of the 60s, 70s. And there is a very interesting wiring diagram for a 3-position switch with a jumper. I don't know why they did this. The switch assembly scheme was different from the modern one. It is mirrored. So I even tried to somehow disassemble, remake modern switchcraft switches, and always did wiring diagrams with a jumper. Well, since everything is vintage, everything must match. Then I started to do it in a simple way, according to the modern method. When these two legs go to the jack, this one goes to the first sensor, this one goes to the second one, and this one goes to the PE. Everything is simple and clear. And I did not hear any difference in sound. You have to dissolve it anyways. But the modern method is simpler. A different matter is with potentiometers. When our potentiometer legs are soldered to the ground. In these potentiometers we have these third legs soldered to the ground. And in the tone potentiometers, the middle legs are soldered to the ground. And this is very important in working with tone. Therefore, we will do and adhere to this particular scheme. What kind of soldering iron do I use? In fact, you don't need a soldering workstation to solder your guitar. I have a Japanese soldering iron, which I'm very pleased with. It heats up very quickly. Here's its mediocre sting. The temperature here is regulated by this knob for 50, 350 to 50 degrees. To solder the potentiometers, I set to maximum, since the temperature must be high enough to quickly solder a wire to the potentiometer cap in order not to overheat it. If we put it on a low temperature, then we will have to warm up the metal for a very long time, warm up the part, and the potentiometer can overheat and accordingly fail. Therefore, I use a high temperature for this operation. It turns out faster. I use Kimco solder. This is the best solder I've tried. Core thickness is 1 millimeter with flux inside, plus rosin. Very pure rosin, which leaves practically no traces. And so, this is the wiring diagram from 1952 to 1960. It will be volume. This will be volume. This is tone. This is also tone. Accordingly, since this is our top, neck, it will be the sine, bridge. There will be an input of wires, here an output to a jack. I bend the last third legs on the volume potentiometers here. On the tone potentiometer, I bend the middle legs. And immediately solder them. You see? Excellent. Shiny ones. Shiny thin surface. This suggests that the solder is very good and works well with temperature. Next, we need to solder the ground. For this, I use tinned copper wire. You can use even this braided wire. It will also sound good. There is nothing wrong with that if you don't have such a wire. Sometimes I use thicker wire because I found it in Switzerland in electrical wire that was done in the 30s in an old Swiss villa. Electricians took out the old wiring, changed it, and I noticed that there was a wire suitable for me. And as we know, that the alloys have now changed. They're a little different. So I chose the old copper as opposed to the modern one. 1 millimeter thickness. My Swiss wire, it has a thickness of 1.1. Okay. Well, they're very similar. But this is vintage and this is modern. If we look at the old photographs of the timber block of the 50s, then we will notice that the grounding goes, you see here, from this potentiometer to this, there is no ground, but only here. Here we see from this potentiometer from volume to tone, and here from volume to tone, there is nothing here. And here too. In some Les Pauls, there is a loop. Someone says that this is a ground loop and this is bad. Here's the scheme. But to be honest, I did not hear the difference. I tried it anyway. Everything works, nothing makes noise, there are no interferences. Maybe I didn't hear something, yeah? But I always solder with this loop. Well, this time let's try to do it like this, without this segment. A very useful thing in the workshop a medical clamp.
Зажим медицинский.
Well, we have the ground ready. Now we will solder the capacitor. We solder one leg to the third leg and the second to the middle leg. Volume. Something like that. Ready? Ready. Now we have to solder the switch. For this, we need a wire. I'm using a copy of a vintage braided wire, screened. How is it different from other cables? Let's say you can buy virtually the same cable at stewmac.com. Yeah, it suits the purpose, but there is a number of differences that are quite significant if we're engaged in replicating vintage Les Pauls. First, in vintage Les Pauls, the braid does not consist of 3 vanes, but of 2, just like here. 1, 2. In some other versions of this wire, this braid consists of 3 wires, and this is no longer our case. Suppose you can buy a wire on the StewMac. It will be very similar, but it will have 3 vanes on the braid, and the inner core will be tinned, just like in this case. It's the reel from stewmac.com. We see that this one, it is tinned. They're soldered together, these several vanes. But they can also make the ground. Generally, it's a good wire, quite tough, does its job well and sounds good. But I like to use more vintage wire for my pickups. To solder the switch, we need 3 pieces of this wire. 2 segments of about 42 centimeters, so we take it with a margin. And 1 segment is a little larger. Well, let's make 50. Just to be sure. This segment will go to the jack at the signal output. And the other two shorter ones will go from switch to these two to the volume potentiometer. I highly recommend using this tool for tinning wires. We will work with the modern scheme this time. It is the simplest, most logical, and works very well. It is difficult to get confused in it. This leg will be for one contact, this one for the second signal from potentiometer. And these two will be the exit to jack. Make them closer to each other. And this will be our ground. So, the jack we have is the longest wire. That's why we will use it here. We will immediately solder it here. Great. So we have it soldered, okay. Now, it will be loaded into the Les Paul in this way. So this wire will go right here, and these wires will be lowered down and pass through the holes through the body of the guitar. This wire respectively too. We do not need this braid here, so we will move it right up to here. Now, let's take, of course we can take the cable for the ground, like this here, and rub it here, and solder it to this leg, to the ground. But it seems to me that this is a little inconvenient, because this wire is quite rigid. It's too tough, and for a small section, I like to take a piece of, not like this, but of this tinned cable from the StewMac website. Here we wind these wires like this. All together. You can use a different color to make it clear that this is ground. And here we also solder our ground. It is better to remove all protruding tails so that they do not cling to anything. We see that the wire will go to the jack, it's the longest of all, and these two to the potentiometers, volume bridge and volume neck. They will be soldered to the same leg where our capacitor is soldered, that is here. This wire will go to the neck pickup. So we mark it, so that in the future it will be recognized that this is a neck pickup. Respectively, the second short wire will be the bridge. So our wiring is ready, and it will wait for installation in the guitar. Well, my friends, just have to assemble Les Paul, go to the studio and record a small demo. How does it all sound? And I say goodbye to you, but not for long.
Rock and roll frog.
Let's go somewhere quiet where we can engage. Let's go somewhere rowdy where we can misbehave.